Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Hahn Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Hahn Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Robert O'Dowd. Robert is the Chief Executive of the Rose Theatre Kingston, the largest producing theatre in southwest London. What's unique about Robert is that he combines a passion for the arts and design with the aim to create and develop sustainable performing arts businesses. So whether you're interested in our beloved Rose Theatre Kingston, the creative arts in general, or would like to know more about the business side of the creative industries, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Robert, to the Inside Kingston podcast. As I mentioned to you, I'm excited about this conversation because there are many facets of both the business world and the creative arts world, which I think you work on, and I'd like to hear your opinion about. But to kick off this conversation, I thought we'd start by going back in time, if that's okay. So when I think of the theatre, I think of how I was personally introduced to the theatre, and I think how a lot of listeners probably were introduced to the theatre as well, which is via school trips and classroom plays. And this weekend, I had the pleasure of introducing my daughter to the theatre. We went to see a production of The Gruffalo at the Rose. Mm-hmm. It was really good, by the way, and it made us reading the book afterwards a completely different experience. But I'd like to ask you, what was your introduction to the theatre?
Well, I must be very frank and upfront, is that I'm not a huge, or I wasn't a huge, and maybe still not a huge fan of the theatre. And that's no irony or no schadenfreude in the fact that I'm now running a theatre. I mean, I suppose my introduction to the theatre probably wasn't at school, because I was an oarsman, so I spent most of my life rowing when I was at school. Okay. And I don't have a memory of my parents being particularly big theatre goers. My parents were very much into classical music, so we probably went to a lot of classical music concerts. Then, I suppose over the years, I have gone to the theatre. I have a slightly strange tendency as well that I don't like musicals particularly. So I don't tend to go to musicals, although there's a very amusing anecdote when my wife and I, when I was actually director at Classic FM and we were at a concert at the Barbican, and as we came out of the concert, I said, oh, look, there's a Victor Hugo play on next week. Let's go and see it. So I bought tickets without really thinking about what I was doing, and turned up the following week to see what I thought was going to be a play, which was Les Miserables. Which was quite amusing, really, because, and I joke not, I sort of went into the theatre and I sat down and I still thought I was going to see a play. There was a slight hint in the fact that the very late departed Princess Diana was sat in the audience, which slightly surprised me. And then this musical unfolded in front of me. So I must admit that's the one musical I did like, and I do like, but generally I must admit I don't like musicals. And then I suppose when I was at Classic FM, for which I was at 10 years, we did a lot of work with Barclay Stage Partners, and because of my job then I used to go to the theatre quite a lot. And yeah, I suppose over the years I have been to the theatre to see stuff I particularly want to see, either a title or an actor, which is quite amusing now because I probably go to the theatre twice a week at the moment.
Oh wow, okay. There's so much in what you said there that I want to unpack in different bits throughout this conversation. But one thing that you've mentioned there has already sort of pricked my ears. And this is your statement, you don't really like musicals. And that's really interesting from the point of view of where I definitely wanted to touch on in this conversation at some point, which is this business of context. So my impression of the arts in general is that the more context somebody has, the better they can navigate their way through or enjoy a particular form of art. And I'm thinking of the theatre in particular. My exposure to the theatre has been mainly through musical theatre, I must be honest. But how would you suggest somebody like me or one of the listeners builds their, let's call it, theatre vocabulary. So that, in other words, they can go from enjoying a Les Miserables or even a simple musical to understanding the context behind, say, a John Malkovich play, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a John Malkovich play is there's no real preparation you can do for that. It was an extraordinary play. I mean, one of the things that we are doing, I suppose, more frequently, and the National Theatre are doing more frequently, and a lot of people are doing more frequently, is actually to do adaptations of a novel or a film. Oddly, someone has done an adaptation of a film recently. But if you think of, we've just done Captain Corelli, which was hugely successful, and that was a very well-loved book, a hated film. The film was really very poor. But even so, a lot of people saw the film, and although some of the people that came were slightly surprised that Corelli didn't actually appear until the second act. But that's how the book was, whereas obviously when Nicolas Cage was playing Corelli in the film and he was being paid the big bucks, he had to be on from the first scene. So we did My Brilliant Friend 2.5 years ago, which was the adaptation of the Elena Ferranti 4 books, which were, each book was about 400 or 500 pages. And we adapted all 4 books into 2-hour plays. So each book was basically a 1-hour act. I mean, if you look at the autumn season coming up, we have Melly Still, who's our associate artist, is coming with a play, Lovely Bones, which was a very famous book as well. So I think that a lot of people can get their introduction to the theatre by that familiarity, absolutely, and well-written, beautiful novels are often a good way of doing that.
That's really good. Yep. Fantastic. And will adaptations be clearly stated in the programme or in the advert for the play?
Yeah, I mean, we could get into a huge semantic debate about a new play, an adaptation. I mean, obviously, if it's a book, a famous book, and a lot of famous books have been turned into plays, then that's pretty obvious. And by definition, if you've got a 500-page book and you're seeing it in 2 hours, it's going to be an adaptation. So yes, I think that would always be very clear. Then you obviously have the amazing body of extraordinary plays that go back to Shakespeare and beyond.
Indeed.
But, I'm the first. I mean, I love Shakespeare. I go to Shakespeare a lot. But it's quite hard to get into it. I remember that when we used to have Propeller, the Ed Hall company, it was always rather good because they always came with 2 plays. So you'd see the first one and you'd enjoy it, but it would take you about 15, 20 minutes to get into the language. But then when you saw the next one, either the next night or 2 nights later, you were straight off the bat, bang on it, because you were already in the mood for Shakespearean prose. So I think a lot of people find it hard to get, once you're into Shakespeare, it's extraordinary, but a lot of people find it very hard to get into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely my experience. And I think the only thing that has been helpful is, without thinking about it too much, taking the suggestion you've just made, which is building it up slowly from a musical to then a play from which I'm familiar with, either the film or the book, and then going into something that I'm then less and less familiar with. But I've built up at least some context to get to that place. So
yeah, I don't think you have to do it from a musical, by the way. I think that most children will see a Christmas show, and some theatres do a pantomime. We don't do a pantomime because of the way we're built and because we've got Richmond and Wimbledon right next door to us. But your kids, they've seen Gruffalo. Hopefully they'll come back and see Oi Frog. And then when they're in their teenagers, they might come and see Lovely Bones. And then they might come and see something because it's on their curriculum and think, gosh, that's quite good. And then, they get the love of theatre. I mean, the one thing I would say is that I would say our biggest competitor at the moment for the Rose, but I think the Rose's biggest competitor is probably the National Theatre. But soon after that are Netflix and Amazon, because the stuff they're doing is so extraordinary. But I think once a person has seen a live performance of a play or music or opera or ballet, there's such a difference between a live performance and watching it on a screen. So I think that the important thing is to get people in the theatre, however that may be, whether it's through a pantomime, whether it's through a kids show, whether it's through a musical, whether it's through, whatever. Six, for instance, is a wonderful example. A lot of people are coming to Six who've never been to the theatre, but hopefully they'll get the fact that that's extraordinary theatre and they'll come again.
Oh, that's brilliant. So, Robert, let me ask you this. Your title, of course, is Chief Executive, but how would you describe your role at the Rose today?
Well, I would say that I am in charge of everything, but I have a very good board. We are a charity, so I have a board of trustees to whom I suppose I report. And then underneath me, I have 3 executives who are all very strong. And then underneath them, there are 6 or 7 managers. So to me, my main focus is on setting strategy, is working with my executive and managers to make sure that we are, maximizing everything we do, that at all times we are delighting our customers, that we manage our costs, and that we maximize our relationship with our patrons. It's like any other business. I hate to say it. A lot of people in the arts don't like it when I say that, but if you can delight your customer and manage your costs and maximize your revenue opportunities, then you have a business. If you don't do any of those 3, then you don't have a business. And I think an awful lot of people forget about that.
I think that's a fascinating way of putting it, because in preparing for this interview, that is something I most definitely got from reading about you that isn't common in the creative arts world, which is this thinking around a business, even though it's in the creative arts sector, still needs to be run as a business. After all, you want to be around for a long time so that you can help develop and help thrive the creative arts scene within the community that you're in, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that we are a creative business where both words are equally important and equally relevant. I think it's quite amusing because when I came in, 7.5 years ago, I think a lot of people thought I would dumb the theatre down, but actually the exact opposite. What I need to make a great business is great productions, great plays, and the better the play, the better the business. Indeed. So anybody who takes that shortcut and just says, "Ooh, let's just dumb it down," they've got it wrong, because actually your business will fail. But then there's no point having a great business without great art, and there's no point having great art if you haven't got a business that will actually keep it going, as you said. So to me, they are absolutely symbiotically interwoven.
Robert, help me and our listeners understand a little bit about how you arrived at your management style. So let's just go way back. What did you study at university?
Environmental biology.
Okay, and what was your first role after university?
I was a graduate trainee at Jaeger.
All right, okay. So the retail sector.
I was in the retail sector for quite a long time, yeah. So I was in the retail sector, and that was completely by mistake. My career probably has been put together by mistake. So I was going to be an accountant. I had offers from accountancy firms. I was a scientist. It was the logical thing to do.
Absolutely.
But in my last year at university, I happened to have Monday off every week for the whole year. And some friends of mine were working at Jaeger, and they said, they're always really keen on a thing called a Monday mobile, because in those days, they used to be shut on Sundays, and they used to let their permanent staff every other week have Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. So they wanted part-time staff on a Monday. So I thought, well, I can do that. And they said, and also you get a navy blue blazer. And I needed a new navy blue blazer for Henley. So actually, it seemed to me to kill 2 stones with 1 bird, or whatever it is, 2 birds with 1 stone. But I could earn some money, and I could get myself a nice new blazer, put my Leander Club buttons on it, and away we go. So that was the only reason I got into it. And then while I was there, they came to me and they said, "Robert, have you thought about going on our graduate scheme?" And I said, "No, I'm going to go and be an accountant." And they said, "Well, we really think you'd be very good on the graduate scheme." And that's how it started, to be honest.
Wow, serendipity. It's to blame for most things in life, I guess, isn't it? So you've already mentioned there your time at Classic FM, but I think you only brushed upon it, and it's actually a lot more than just a brush. You actually helped set up and launch Classic FM as we know it. So could you tell us a little bit about your time, not only at Classic FM, but then the businesses that sort of spawned from that? So your time in the music business as a whole.
I'd worked my way through retail. I ended up as the buying and merchandising director at House of Fraser. So, running £1 billion a year, buying budget, et cetera. Maybe I should have seen the writing on the wall about House of Fraser all that time ago. And then just, again, another serendipity, the husband of someone I had worked with at another retail company was setting up Classic FM. And he contacted me and he said, "Robert, I'd like you to come to Classic FM." I said, "No, I know nothing about classical music, nothing about radio, nothing about marketing." He says, "You're perfect." And in a way, he was right, because what we tried to do at Classic FM was not to be a sort of hardcore classical music station. Now, a lot of people hated Classic FM, and we particularly enjoyed the fact that Radio 3 came after us very critically, because actually we worked out they gave us about £6 million worth of free PR by being critical. So one of the things that we did is we identified that people couldn't listen to full pieces of classical music during a day. So we programmed the station based upon the time of day. So in the morning, when you might go from the bedroom to the bathroom to the kitchen to the car, we played short pieces. When you got to the evening, when people were at home, so from 7 till 9, we did the evening concert. So we then did full pieces of work. The other big decision we made was actually that we wanted great presenters who might know something about classical music rather than classical music experts who might or might not be good presenters. So we actually recruited and employed presenters who could do that. And then I suppose the magic of Classic FM is that we got Robin Ray to program, which in those days was pretty radical, a huge database of music. I think it was about 40,000 albums we programmed. And he then classified those all by tempo, by mood, by suitability. So, I mean, again, some of the purists don't like the fact that a computer was programming the radio station, but that's how all pop stations are programmed. So actually, we would say that between 6 in the morning and 9 in the morning, this was the mood we wanted. We wanted it upbeat, short pieces, quite fast tempo. And then the machine would come up with an extraordinary array of beautiful music that an individual, I would argue, couldn't do. And one of the strengths of that is that we would program a familiar piece, but then something very unfamiliar, but beautiful or relevant. So that's how we set it all up. And I suppose in some ways, that's at the heart of how I still run my businesses, because funnily enough, we put the listener at the heart of what we were doing, not the erudite presenters who thought they wanted to play full pieces of classical music over breakfast when no one could actually listen to it.
Yeah, and that to me just screams of being ahead of time in terms of how you were thinking of designing the radio station at the time. Nowadays, we see that being brought forward front and center even to a lot more businesses. I mean, we could use the stereotypical example of the likes of Apple or Amazon, always sort of bringing the consumer first, sometimes to the detriment of other businesses. But nonetheless, that thinking is a lot more commonplace nowadays.
Yeah, and to be fair, the founding chief executive of Classic FM, a chap called John Spearman, who had run Collett Dickinson Pierce for many years, and actually came up with the phrase, I think it was just before the pitch to Boots, when he actually came up with the phrase, the nation's pharmacy. So John had a huge background. He also did the Hamlet advert, cigar adverts, if you remember those. You're probably too young to remember those. I think
they're on YouTube. So yeah, they're pretty.
I'm sure they are. So he came into Classic FM from a hugely successful career in advertising, getting right to the top of the advertising industry. And I suppose simplistically, he applied those principles to a radio station.
So this leads me on to the next part of your career, and I'm going to start off by using the word design. You've mentioned this word design a few times now in terms of how you guys thought about designing the radio station, designing the user experience. You then went on to work, and I'm not using the exact chronological order here, Robert, so forgive me, but
that's fine.
Your time at the Design Council, in particular, a project you ran called Design of the Times, I believe?
Designs of the Time, yeah.
Designs of the Time, my apologies. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Because it seems to me like there's a thread here from what you do today with the Rose around this business of designing all facets of the business. In the case of the Rose, even the plays that one eventually comes to see, but that's the output of the design input that you're thinking about throughout the process. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. To me, the Design Council, it was off the back of a big piece of research that was looking at the perceptions of people across Europe about design in their country. And one of the things that was interesting is that all the European countries, all the countries thought they had very good design in their country. And the Europeans, so the Germans like French design, the Italians like German design, whatever, but nobody was actually liking British design at that time.
Okay.
Which is rather odd because we are one of the great design nations. And then the British population thought design was a little bit of cars, a little bit of David Beckham bling, and a bit of fashion. So it was an interesting idea. So the Design Council wanted to come up with a public engagement program on design. They chose to appoint me as the chief executive. And then the first creative director we had was a guy called John Thackeray, who had spent his life being critical of design, which is quite funny. So he and I created a program that was about design thinking and using design to help citizens co-design solutions to either economic or societal problems they had. So the first designs of the time in the Northeast, we were looking at rural transport, we were looking at low carbon housing, we were looking at how to grow food in a streetscape, etc., etc. So in some ways, what it was not what the Design Council was slightly after, because they wanted us to put design in plastic boxes, but we were never going to do that, partly because of John. So we ran the first one in the Northeast, and then we ran the second one in Cornwall. And you're right. I mean, the principle of that is that designers have an extraordinary skill, and part of that skill is an iterative process. But what we wanted to do is to allow citizens to get involved in that iterative process. So we had a 6-stage phase where you diagnosed properly what people were after, and you kept challenging that, because there's a wonderful story about, actually I think it was Panasonic. So Panasonic were doing focus groups, and I hate focus groups more than anything in the world. So they were doing focus groups on the colour of new portable radios. And the focus groups were all coming out with bright orange, bright yellow, lime green, etc. And as a little present as the people left to go home, they said, oh, well, do take a radio and go home with it. And every single person in that focus group took home a dark grey radio. So you have to be very careful about focus groups. And what Designs at the time tried to do was to actually talk citizens through the processes, and when you hit a barrier, you iterated and came up with other solutions. But rather than just understanding what they wanted, they stayed in the process. So they helped design it, they helped deliver it, and then they helped actually work with it in the community. So that's the essence of what Designs at the time is. And yes, you're right. I believe it's the same argument. Put the citizen, put the customer at the heart of what you do, and you probably get better outcomes.
And what's fascinating to me about that, Robert, is this notion around design that you mentioned, having such a big influence on everyday issues, from, I think you mentioned, from sexual health to low carbon housing and everything in between. Perhaps this is just my perception, but I still think the average Joe out there, including me, does not perceive design in that way. And
no, it really doesn't.
The impact that good design can have on many facets of life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the sexual health was a fascinating project. We worked with the NHS, and it had the most dreadful name. It was called a gum clinic, and I'm trying to remember what the GUM stands for. I can't remember. And we were working with people in Gateshead, across the river from Newcastle, and they just hadn't spoken to the right people. So we co-designed a service with teenagers, bi and homosexual men, illegal immigrants, and drug takers.
Wow.
Now, not many of those people fill out questionnaires.
No, absolutely.
So actually, and one of the things that we discovered and we co-designed is that when a 16 or maybe even a 14-year-old is waiting in the gum clinic, that's awful for them. So, just a simple thing, we designed a paging system that you had your appointment there, but then you were allowed to leave, and then you were paged when you had to come back 10, 15 minutes later.
All right.
So we went through a process of all the barriers that were stopping, because sadly in those days, the Northeast had they came top of one of the league tables, which was a little bit unfortunate. It was the sexually transmitted diseases. And part of that is because no one was using the clinic. So what we did is we identified with the users all of the barriers to getting to the clinic. And then we designed with the users, and that's the 4 groups that would never normally be engaged with, solutions to how they would overcome, with us, design solutions. So to me, that's the sort of definition of a good user-centered design, where the user is involved all the way through, and unexpected people are designing the solutions.
That's fascinating, Robert. That really is. Let's bring that into the present. So if we think about the Rose Theatre today, and it seems to me that you guys are also very active in trying to embrace the community, or the Kingston upon Thames community which you're within. And that mainly happens, or that engagement mainly happens through the visual engagement I see is mainly through the Royal Borough of Kingston and also Kingston University. But could you tell me a little bit about your vision for the Rose in our community?
Well, at the end of the day, and this is slightly cynical of us in a way, but we have 2 main streams, or 3 main streams of income. We have the box office, so a lot of our effort and time goes into programming the theatre. We get money from the borough and from the university, which is hugely generous, and they're very, very important stakeholders to us. And then we do fundraising. And I think fundraising in all arts is a hugely important part of what everyone does. And I think that because we are a big theatre, you don't join or support the Rose to have a sort of transactional access to tickets like you might do at the Donmar or like you might do at the National. You know, I'm a supporter of the National. I'm a supporter actually of too many theatres, and that's partly because I want to see plays, and sometimes they sell out before I can do it. So if you're a member, you then get access. But we are so big that we do sell out occasionally, but not very often. So actually, to be a proper community theatre loved by our community, we have to do more than just putting on plays. So we have a youth theatre now that is well over 1,100 young people who come and get involved across the year. With Royal Borough of Kingston, we welcome in Kingston Music Services. We host International Youth Arts Festival. We're running an outreach programme at the moment with Cambridge Estate. You know, we have at any given time during the year or the month, we have a dementia cafe, we have a breastfeeding mothers cafe. You know, we have a bridge circle who come in and use the building. So to me, we have to have world-class drama on the stage, but I want the community to love and embrace the Rose so that it is their building, and that some people may never come and see a play, and that's fine. If they come and have a coffee and meet a friend, or if it's someone who's elderly, who is feeling lonely and they have an opportunity to meet people, you know, to me, that is all fantastic.
And I, for one, can vouch for the fact that it is a great venue. It's just a beautiful building to go in and have a sort of informal coffee meeting with a client or with a professional connection, as I've done that myself. So definitely something that the community can look out for and enjoy.
Good.
With that in mind, Robert, any exciting developments or projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Whoa. Well, Captain Corelli, which was a great success for us, did very, very well, exceeded its target and its budget. Last Thursday, I think it was, we announced that it was transferring into the West End. So that's going into the Harold Pinter Theatre. So we're very excited about that with our commercial co-producer. Yeah, the 4th of July, that opens at the Harold Pinter.
Okay.
We've announced the visiting shows we've got coming this autumn, but in the next week or so, we'll be announcing our Rose-produced shows, of which we expect to, well, we're either going to do one show for 4 weeks or 2 shows for 2 weeks each.
Okay.
And then we're working on a very exciting spring season, but I'm afraid I couldn't announce, well, it doesn't bother me, but my executive producer is frighteningly superstitious and
of course
like stuff announced before it's ready to go.
No, that's absolutely fine.
And then on the 16th of June, there's another very large piece of news coming out from the Rose, which is announcing another transfer into London. So I can't talk about
fantastic.
that.
Well, it's a watch this space then, but most definitely congratulations from me to the Rose Theatre on that front. Robert, as we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you 3 quick fire questions that I think listeners are always interested in. I guess gut feel responses, if you wouldn't mind, but what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Relax? What?
There we go. I thought a chief executive wouldn't know what the meaning of that word was.
No, well, I'm a rower, so I carry on rowing. I go to the theatre a lot. Some people might say that's not relaxing. My wife, who comes with me most times, she does sometimes moan about it being a busman's holiday, although she does get to see a lot of plays.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I suppose socialising with friends and doing sport. I mean, I'm a member of a very nice health club in Fulham, so I spend quite a lot of time there, and I'm on the river or I'm cycling and stuff. So yeah,
lovely. Sounds lovely. So people are always interested in trying to find out more about other people's references. With that in mind, who do you admire and why?
Nelson Mandela, because I think he was one of the only statesmen we've had for many years, and I don't think we've seen the like of him since he sadly was then not leader and sadly died.
Indeed.
From a business perspective, gosh, I think the people who have set up the Bridge Theatre, which is Nick Heitner and Nick Starr, are doing extraordinary work. They both used to run the National Theatre. They took a huge risk of opening a brand new theatre by London Bridge. And they've had some mixed fortunes on plays, but it's very brave, and they're now also opening up another theatre in another property development in King's Cross. So I think I have huge respect for them. Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the bigger corporate world, I've always been a huge fan of Richard Branson. I'm a huge fan of Riverford. which is the organic distribution of organic food.
They're doing great work.
I think they're doing great work. I think their business model is very clever. I think that the environmental challenges that we face at the moment are huge, and I think that they are showing the way that the supermarkets could follow.
Absolutely. So the last of the 3 quick-fire questions. Robert, what is your favourite book?
I would say it's the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake.
Okay, I haven't heard of that.
Actually, and that's similar but different. I love the Dark Materials 4 books trilogy as well by Philip Pullman, which is, I think, extraordinary writing as well.
Brilliant. Finally, Robert, where can people go to find out more about you and the Rose Theatre Kingston?
Oh, blimey. Well, obviously the Rose website is a good place to go. So that's rosetheatrekingston.org. I do have a Book of Face page somewhere, but I don't let many people look at it. Okay. And I think LinkedIn is probably not a bad place to look.
Okay, fantastic. So, Robert, thank you very much for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a real pleasure getting to know your story.
Great. Pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.